Welcome to Her Media Diary, the podcast where African women share their real stories, bold moves, and behind-the-scenes moments that shaped their journeys. I'm your host, Dr. Yemisi Akimobola, and with each episode, we're pulling back the curtain on what it really means to build a media career, break barriers, and stay true to your voice. So whether you're just starting out or already making waves, this space is for you. In this episode, I'm joined by Neema Iyer, a civic technologist, artist, and founder of Policy, a feminist collective in Uganda that's reimagining how African women experience technology. Neema's work blends data science with storytelling, games, and design, all to make sure our digital spaces are not only smart, but just and inclusive. From digital safety to Afrofeminist data futures, she's pushing back against extractive tech systems and asking the world, what if digital tools were built by and for African women from the start? Stay with us. All right, Neema, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. Welcome to Her Media Diary.
Thank you for having me.
You've lived across several countries, Nigeria, Tanzania, you were in the US for your degrees, Uganda, and you're currently in Australia. So, and your work sits across tech, storytelling, and feminism. But let's start from the beginning. What was young Neema like? Where were you? Were you always drawn to questions around justice and systems and tech?
Thanks for that question. I wouldn't say so. I wouldn't say that I was initially drawn to justice and systems. I definitely was very curious. My father was quite interested in technology, so he would often get pretty new devices. And I remember when and my brother was very into video games. And so my parents also encouraged him to, explore different devices. And so as a young child, I grew up around a lot of technology, but at the same time, I think I, as a girl, was not encouraged to seek out technology or to use technology. When I was young, I was always encouraged to become a doctor, to become a pediatrician. I remember people saying things like, oh, you're so caring with your dolls. You would make a great doctor. You would make a great pediatrician. It was never, oh, you're so curious. You're always, you're playing on the computer, that you would become a software engineer or you would be into computers. So it's interesting that even though your parents have your best interest, they still steer you in different directions based on gender. And that was definitely something visible when I was growing up. But I was just a very creative child. I was very drawn to art. And again, that's something that was discouraged. So my parents would say things like, oh, you can have art as a hobby, but, you've got to have a real job. And I think this will come into our conversation later. But I would definitely say I was much more creative in art. And if I had grown up in a different environment, I think I would have steered more towards the art side. But I think that carries on into my life, even now at the moment, that I'm still very curious. I still like exploring a lot of different facets. And yeah, I think that carries through in my life.
Do you do much arts now?
I do tons of art. So if you look at any of the work at Policy, most of the art is done by me. If you look at our games, all that art's done by me. I do art for podcasts. I do arts for reports. I find doing art to be a very calming experience. When I do digital art, I also do physical art. I do paintings. You can maybe see an easel right there in the background.
Yes,
so, yeah,
yes,
it's still a part of my life.
Which is why I asked the question. I didn't want to answer, but yes, I could see that. So you studied. Now you got to help me pronounce this word.
Epidemiology.
Epidemiology. So just for our listeners, there's some words that I struggle to pronounce. Yeah. Like it took me a long time to be able to pronounce Mediterranean.
Oh yeah.
Like that takes a lot of effort. Yeah. I don't know why, but it's just some words. Anyway, moving on. So you studied that before building one of Africa's most creative civic tech labs. How did that shift happen from kind of going from public health now to public data?
Yeah, so as I said in my previous question, I was steered towards, becoming a doctor. I did study pre-med, and then at some point in my last year, I was like, this is not for me. I think I was listening so much to the the voices that had been in my ear my whole life, that, finally in my early 20s, I was like, I don't think this is actually my dream. I think this is someone else's dream. But then I was so deep in it, and I was like, oh, how do I get out? And so I liked the idea of public health, that you would be able to be creative in your approaches to improving the health of large groups of people. And so I studied epidemiology in my master's, and that's basically, it's the statistics of health. So, during COVID, suddenly everyone became like an armchair epidemiologist, right? Trying to predict how many people have the disease,
Yeah.
and I think that's really where I could see what I studied really shine through. So technically, it's not a big shift. I was already interested in working on data, and so it was just a matter of dropping the health part of things and working more broadly on data. I actually ended up working, at the time, SMS projects were rising in popularity, and then they were also like simple. So basically, using simple phones for creative approaches to different sectors like health. Like one example is there was like a Mama project in Tanzania where you text women messages throughout their pregnancy so that they're aware of what's happening in their bodies. I mean, now they're the apps, right? Your baby is the size of a raspberry or a melon, and it was
Yes.
basically taking that and making it simplified so that women with simple phones also had access to that. Um, so that's where I made the jump to tech and health. And then eventually I saw that there was a very big gap in how within the African continent we were not making the best use of data. I felt that that was a very big gap, and I felt that I already had the data skills, and that it would be interesting to find creative ways to work with civil society and governments on using public data, basically. And that's sort of how policy as an organization happened.
Mm-hmm. So, was there a moment or a situation that made you realize that we need to center African women in digital transformation, not after it happens, but while it's happening?
Yeah, there is actually a moment, but it wasn't at the start. So I don't want to say that policy was started with that in mind, because that's not
Yeah.
really true. There was a moment where I realized, okay, we need to do some digital transformation that is effective, because the story that I tell is that my mom, after several years, decided to transfer the house she had gifted to her mother into her name when my grandmother passed away. And she took a long time, to do it. I think it was over 10 years. And she was like, okay, it's finally time. And just dealing with, the housing office to just change a name from, I mean, one person. Of course, it's an important procedure that has to happen, but it
Mm,
lasted like 2 years. And it was very frustrating, where she would have to go like every 2 weeks and like look for someone, and the person wasn't there, the
mm,
person was on leave, the person was, it's just these issues. And I was like, okay, there's definitely a better way to do these things. But it's the same way with so many processes: when you're going to get your passport, when you're going to renew your driver's license. And this is, several years ago as well. Things have definitely improved. And that was really where I was like, okay, I was really inspired that, there are ways we can digitize in a way that really works for people.
mm,
And but where I really started to focus on women specifically was when I got the chance to be part of a feminist internet research network. It's
mm.
a research network that, really brought me into this idea of the feminist internet. And that was around 2019. And since then, it really, I think, I've always been a feminist, but I never used the vocabulary. I never had that sort of feminist instruction,
Yeah,
in
yeah.
some ways. But I obviously lived and breathed it, and, through my whole life. And so it just made sense. It clicked, that this is what I want to do. I want to center women's voices and how technology is happening. Also, again, because I still think there is a very big gap in that sector.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting what you said about kind of one day realizing that actually, oh, I'm a feminist, or I'm actually living and breathing this term.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people who kind of have a very difficult relationship with that
Yeah.
word. But it's so true, because I think I also had that moment where I had that realization actually everything that I really deeply care about was around women's rights and gender equality and essentially feminist principles, right? What does that mean for you? in the context of the work that you do?
As in coming into realizing
Hmm.
that my work has always been very grounded.
Yeah.
It's been interesting because I remember being at my first meeting and just feeling like there was a lot of jargon that felt a bit exclusionary. Like because I had not studied that or I had not read about this language that we have, I did feel like a bit of an outsider. So it felt like, oh, but this is how I live, but I don't speak this language. It felt like that.
Hmm.
And so a lot of my work is really about trying not to use jargon that could make people feel excluded. I
Mm.
think I try to bring that into all my work, and that's why I always try to use creative approaches. So, art, drawings, murals, poetry, anything that makes people feel connected to an issue. I think that that's really important to me that we don't get stuck on words and language, but rather like how we feel.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And even actually, when you look at a lot of feminist scholarship discourse, there's that kind of occupation with the term and the word. And
Mm.
actually, I kind of feel we need to move beyond that, but also kind of thinking about, what you said about people feeling excluded. Like you felt excluded, even though your work is definitely within the space.
Yeah, it could be that there's some grandmother in the village who, has been educating girls all her life and she's done all these amazing feminist things, but then she doesn't speak that specific language, right? But that doesn't make her any less feminist.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you founded Policy as a civic tech collective, but it doesn't look or sound or feel like that traditional kind of tech NGO. It's
Hmm.
playful, like you said, it's creative, all your arts and stuff is feminist. So, what did you want to do differently?
Yeah, I feel like sometimes the NGO space can be so stuffy. There has been a way that things have been done, and there are a lot of people who want to keep the status quo. Whether these organizations are effective or not, whether those methodologies are effective or not. And I don't think that always works. I think it works, maybe, I mean, for some things like health, like you want to be serious, you want to give a serious message. But I mean, even living here in Australia, there's so much effort to make things relatable, to make content available to everyone, to reach whoever in whatever way. If you have to reach Gen Z, then you've got to tailor your content to Gen
Mm,
Z.
mm,
And I think a lot of NGOs got stuck in some era. And there's like a lot of respectability politics. I mean, there's a lot of issues generally within the NGO sector. I think as someone in there, I can also say, looking in, that there are things that need to be fixed. And yeah, I
like
think
what?
that's really why things that need to be
Like
fixed.
what?
I would say just like what we're spending money on, for example, or how we conduct meetings. Like, is it as effective to hold a big conference in a big hotel? We've had participants who have told us like they don't want to attend certain meetings because they don't feel like it's their space. They've never
Mm,
been to a big hotel like that. They don't think, that they would be welcome there, for example.
mm,
So,
mm,
for example, we have an annual event called Data Fest, and we really try to do these events at universities or so this year we're doing it together with the Ministry of ICT at their hub. So they've made like a really nice hub in Uganda where everyone's welcome and they can use computers, and even that can be, people can even then feel, oh, I can't go to a ministry hub. So it's how do we reach the people we want to where they will actually feel comfortable. I think for me, I think a lot of my colleagues will know that I really try to stay away from like doing things in hotels, just feeling like you can't be creative in those spaces, even
mm.
that you don't have privacy, just the way things are done. Um, so those are some of the things. Just what are we doing that isn't effective, that isn't inclusionary? Yeah, just rethinking those.
Yeah, I mean this era, this time with the cuts and things like USAID and all of those things are perhaps periods for that introspection, right? For change,
Hmm.
because apart from the things that you said already, there's also that concentration of focus on certain organizations who are like, you go to some of these events and it's the same voices, the same people, the same
100%. 100%.
same lineup of speakers
Yeah.
who are deemed the experts. And actually, we do our annual conference as well, and we're very, very deliberate in not being about that. You know,
Mm-hmm.
anybody, anybody and everybody is kind of is very welcome to be on our. So you'd see that we don't have like a celebrity status panel or a
Mm-hmm.
keynote with
Right.
some big names as the usual suspects. And I think so. I definitely agree with you. And one of the things that we've had to contend with over the years was people saying, well, we need more men in these spaces. And a conference that started African women in media, obviously, is going
Mm.
to be predominantly women, right? But you do want more men. But actually, in the early stages, it wasn't us stopping men from participating. It was
Mm.
men not participating, if that makes sense. I remember there was one
Yeah.
particular conference we had where we did have, I think we had about five male speakers, and on the day of the conference, not a single one of them showed up, and not a
They
single one of
committed
them,
and they
not,
didn't show up. Oh my
yeah, not a
gosh.
single one of them even said we can't make it anymore. So
Mm.
it's one of those things. But I mean, it's definitely the pandemic really helped to address that. I think I remember we did a couple of years virtually, and it was
Mm-hmm.
almost getting to that kind of 60-40, 50-50 split actually. And now we don't really see that much of a problem. We still have, let's say, 70% women, and that's
Mm.
fine, because actually there are some spaces that you need to see more women, because actually traditionally when you go to conferences or you go to certain spaces, there'll be no women there, or there'll be very few women, you
Yeah.
know so I definitely see, kind of like you said, this is a good era for that introspection in the
Mm-hmm.
NGO space.
100%.
So one of your tools, so I love the title, digital safety, as in safe
Sipping
dash
the tea.
TEA, as in sipping the
Yeah.
tea, right? Okay. So digital safety, it turns online safety into a choose your own adventure experience. Really fascinating. Why do you use play? And or rather, not why do you use play? I think it's more about what is the role of play and storytelling for you. What are you found has worked for you in teaching about serious digital arms like online GBV? And this is an important question, because actually I remember many years ago I was very interested in gamification and news media.
Mm.
And actually there was that conversation around, well, is that trivializing a very serious, sometimes very serious stories? And that was kind of some of the questions that people were asking at that time, right? I don't believe it does. I believe actually gamification, that inclusion that you talked about, allow people to engage with really serious issues, in a more inclusive way, in a way that maybe it makes it feel less of a barrier to engage in those topics. So what have you found? Why have you used play in storytelling on digital arms, and
Yeah.
technology gender-based
It's a
violence?
great
And
question.
what have you found helped?
Yeah, so actually I've taken this one step further. I'm actually doing my
Mm.
PhD now on
Oh,
play
fantastic.
and
I love to
learning.
hear that. Okay.
And it's basically that I feel that play is a very powerful tool. And it's not a tool to be trivialized. And it's something that I'm looking into in terms of gender. So my PhD is looking at gender play learning in digital contexts. And as girls growing up, like even the physical space you are given to play is limited. Like I was not allowed to walk freely on the street when I was growing up. That was not something that was available to me. It was available to my brother. The kinds of games you play, how you move your body, even, is so dictated by culture when you're a girl. And my question is like, how does that impact your whole worldview? In fact, how does that impact how you learn? If you cannot play and explore, I think you cannot learn, because everything I have ever learned in my life has been through play and exploration. I'm not the kind of person who will watch a tutorial, or sit through an online course. And I think I even, like, in university, I really struggled to, like, really, pay attention for the whole semester, because I really like to learn by doing. And I want people to think about all those points, and like how restrictive society is for girls, and how does that impact their long-term learning and lifelong learning as well. And so yeah, I just think that you learn so much more by doing. If you play a game, you are reading, you are active, you are constructing knowledge while you are in this activity, compared to if I just sat you down in a room and I spoke at you. Because that's how a lot of teaching is done now, right? You're spoken at. And yeah, I think that this interactivity, I think it is the future of learning. And I think it is a very powerful tool, even probably especially if it is heavy topics, like digital harm or whatever. There's so many examples of really beautiful games that teach very, very heavy topics.
But let's go deeper into it. I'm really curious about. I mean, give us a very specific example of your organization using play to communicate or to engage people in with a very serious topic of technology facilitated gender-based violence, right?
So yeah, I mean, this game is the example. So we use this game in our trainings, basically. So we have trainings, where we walk you through all the things like two-factor authentication, safe passwords. But the thing is, how many people can you train? We're a small organization.
Mm,
We're not a school, we're not a university. The need for digital safety trainings across Africa is tremendous. Think about how many people are becoming first-time internet users today alone. And then think about how many people have become first-time internet users in the past 10 years. There's no training. Like there's no curricula for how you train people to use the internet, right? So we're just unleashing all these people onto these online spaces with no training whatsoever. And there's no way that as a small civic society organization that we can reach everyone. So it's really trying to see how can you, for the smallest amount of money, reach the most amount of people in an impactful way. So that's why we're trying to use these sort of interactive tools. But to mainly answer your question, we try to use it as much as possible in our trainings. We share it with our partners. They use it in their trainings. And it's an ongoing tool. We're trying to, because tech changes all the time. So trying to stay ahead of that and create new content for new types of games as well. So it's a few years old now, and it's definitely, I would say, in need of a refresher.
Hey there, something really exciting is coming up. It's the African Women in Media 2025 conference. We are bringing together journalists, editors, media leaders, policymakers, academics, creative, the tech community, investors from across the world convening on the 4th and 5th of December 2025 at the African Union Commission building in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, under the theme of Beyond Commitments Advancing Policies for Gender Safe Media. You'll expect to have powerful keynote sessions, hands-on workshops, exhibitions, important networking opportunities, and through the Awin Pitch Zone, which we are reintroducing this year, you'll have the opportunity to meet with media development funds and pitch to them your media business ideas. Tickets are now on sale. It's a great time to secure your spot. To find out more, go to awim25, that's awim25.africanwomeninmedia.com. Join us at the African Union Commission in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia on the 4th and 5th of December for the African Women in Media 2025 conference. You don't want to miss it. Yeah, yeah. So you've worked with everybody from grassroots organizations to Meta's being on Meta's safety board, which is quite interesting. How do you balance that tension between holding tech platforms accountable and working from within, as well?
Yeah, it is quite the tension. I mean, especially when you are a smaller organization, because on one hand, you want the audience, right? You want to be able to talk to the platforms. But at the other side, you also want to share your grievances. And I think there is that worry, like if I complain too much, then I won't have access to them anymore. And yeah, I think it's just about keeping that balance and knowing that even the people within these tech platforms in the African context, they are responsible, to the company that they work for, but at the same time, they have the interests of African people. So it's also knowing that they are conflicted and that we are conflicted and that we're just trying to do our best.
Mm. So, but I mean, I don't know how much you can speak about being on Meta's safety board. What's that experience like? What are the kind of challenges and opportunities that you face being on that space?
I can't say too much about it because a lot of it is under NDA, but I can say that it made me learn how complicated online safety is. Like,
Yeah.
it's more complicated than you could ever imagine. Like, every little issue, you've got to look at it from all these different angles. And, you keep trying to build more features until you have a platform that is so bloated. It has so many things because
Mm,
you're trying to protect for every single use case. And it's a very difficult job. And I work with someone named Cindy, and she's lovely and she's doing her best, but it is very tricky.
And as someone who has worked on Afro-feminist data futures, what does it mean to design AI systems that reflect African women's realities rather than erasing them?
Yeah, that's a good question, but it's also very tricky, and it's obviously something that we talk about quite often at policy. And it's this balance between hyper visibility and invisibility. So, in some ways, the data of African women is very limited. You know, to understand the lived experience of an African rural woman is so difficult. You don't have the data on that. And that's just it. And so, in some ways, they are invisible and their data is not being used in AI systems. And some people could say that's a good thing, that their data is not being exploited. But on the other hand, again, it does mean you're invisible. So your data is not being used, you're not being represented, and whatever the AI spits out is not based on your lived reality.
Hmm.
So you could ask, okay, does that mean we should collect more data from African women? And I think people will differ on that. I'm not going to give one answer or the other. But I think my bigger worry is the flattening of who an African woman is. And not just by like Western companies, but also by, local AI companies where people will say something like, oh, a Ugandan accent. And even then, I'm like, okay, but there's so many Ugandan accents. There's so many languages spoken here. You cannot compress this country into one thing. And so even with women, it's like we cannot compress the experiences of women into this single monolith. And I think that's really what I worry about is that erasure there where you're not getting the full spectrum of the realities of women.
I mean, even just speaking about your own lived experiences, Neema, because you born in Lagos and
I
then
was.
moved to Tanzania and Uganda and the US. Like you've lived in many.
Hmm.
How has that shaped your identity and your intersectionalities and how you see yourself?
Yeah, of course. So I never lived in Tanzania, but my mother's Tanzanian, so I am half
Okay.
Tanzanian, and I'm half Indian, and I grew up in Nigeria. I lived there until I was 18, and yeah, I never see my story reflected anywhere. I feel like you hear so much the story about Africans who have migrated to the US or to London. Like there's so many novels written about this experience. But my question is, okay, but what about the experience of somebody who moved from Nigeria to Tanzania? Like what's that story? And you don't get much of that. You don't get like even like my family's history of how we migrated all over East Africa. There's so few stories that tell of this experience. In fact, there's nothing I can actually refer to on that specific story of my own family. And yeah, I think there's so many, and that does really shape my world, in that knowing that there are so many stories that have to be told that have not been told, and if we don't tell them, they will be lost to history forever. And so it's sort of that erasure that I think that I really do worry about.
It's interesting, yeah, that intra-Africa kind of migration. That's actually a project we've been working on with the Spot GIZ for the last few months, where we are curating stories of women who are kind of doing intra-Africa migration, whether through trade or other things, whether forced or otherwise also, but
Hmm.
mostly in terms
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
free movement, because I know that there's a whole continental wide, with the AFTCA, for example, continental wide efforts to improve the ease of intra-Africa free movement. Obviously there's still infrastructural issues, for example, around airlines,
Hmm.
trying to
Visas,
travel within
terrible.
visas, airlines trying to travel within the continent. I remember I was just recently in Zambia. Obviously, I live in the UK, traveled to Zambia, and I arrived before my colleague who lives in Nigeria and traveled to
Mm.
Zambia because he had to take an airline that took him to the Middle East before coming
Oh
back to the
wow.
continent.
Right,
So
right.
there's still, yeah. So, but we have been working on creative. We call that project is the Move Africa project, curating stories of intra Africa
Lovely.
movements. Yeah. So, but back to your work with kind of designers and developers, which you do a lot of work with. What would you say to young African technologists who want to build more ethical platforms, but feel pressure to chase scale or global trends, like you just said right there about flattening narratives also, and it's almost again another rush to follow what's happening in the West as well.
Yeah, I can't deny, that we live within capitalist systems and that in today's world the social currency or the currency of respect is money. I think that that
Mm,
is unavoidable. I think, back in the just to give you an example of something I think about, that back in the day, billionaires would build hospitals and they would, they did a lot of like public good because that was something that was valued and treasured, was generosity. But no longer. I think now it's just how much can you hoard? Like we always
mm,
are, this is the richest man and this is what the richest man does. And so I can see why young people feel very compelled to follow that path because that is how it is today. And yeah, I totally empathize because that's just what you if you've always grown up seeing that, it's difficult to know that there's another way, to know that there's something that can be based on community or care or ethics. I know it can be very tricky. um, but I think that there are funders, there are communities who are interested in these sort of platforms. I know it's difficult to think about, okay, but what would the business model be? How would it be sustainable unless we make money? But sometimes it you don't need to grow at all costs, right? It's okay to build something and to maintain it and to live off of it. Or even like so many people build, open source tools that, will never make them money, but they know that it is for the greater good of the community and that it always leads to other opportunities. I for young people I always say just build something. Just have a portfolio, have something you can show.
yeah.
You don't need to make money with it because you have no idea what kinds of doors that will open for you. What kinds of jobs, what kinds of opportunities, partnerships, friendships, relationships it can build for you. But always just build something with a good heart in mind. And I think it will take you somewhere.
Absolutely. And if you were to reimagine how social media platforms or AI tools were built, starting from a woman's experience in Kampala or Dar es
Mhm.
Salaam, for example, what would be fundamentally different?
That's a very big question. I feel like if I knew the answer to that, I would
Well, you're
have
better
built it.
placed. Yeah. But it's true.
um,
When if go back how many years, to even before Facebook. Like imagine you were Zuckerberg in that
yeah.
room in Harvard building Facebook, but now thinking about the woman in Kampala, for example.
I really did like the original Facebook though. I joined Facebook in 2005. And like for what it was, I thought that was great. Like I would love to bring
Yeah,
that back. Like it was such a
yeah.
simpler time. Like I would love to just have a tool that just, is photos and
Hook
thoughts and
people.
no,
Yeah.
yeah, and no ads, and that it's something, that maybe if everyone actually, paid a small amount to use the platform, like so that we don't have to see ads, or if there was some other way to contribute to become a member of the platform, like a bartering system, so that it's not a system based on like monetization of your eyeballs all the time. If it was just sharing your photos and your thoughts from people you know and people you love, I feel that was a good time and I would love to go back to that time.
But it's interesting you say that because I think monetization is monetization, right? So even if we
Hmm.
were playing a subscription, there were platforms back then that was the model, and
Yeah.
I don't they don't exist anymore. I remember
Yeah.
there was a platform that raised a lot of money. I can't remember what it was called, but it was focused on how we have content creators, right,
Hmm.
but it's like, okay, this is going to be like a channel, like a YouTube platform where we have really good curated content
Mm.
creation, and then you would pay a subscription because you want to access really good
Yeah.
quality content. And it fell flat, and a lot of people put a lot of money, and it fell flat. But so I think there's still that tension of organizational survival, and monetization is still monetization, whichever
I
kind of
mean,
lens
it's
you
like, why would you
use.
pay if you can get it free, right? Like, it's Instagram is free. So why would I think people wouldn't be very incentivized to move to a platform where they have to pay when the content is also very high quality on
Yeah.
a free platform where you have to watch ads. I think if maybe, yeah, as you said, if this was before the platforms that had monetized, maybe, but now it would be very difficult.
Mm.
Once people get something for free, it's difficult to change.
Well, I guess also there's the issue of the access, right? And the
Mhm.
how many people can afford to pay such fees as well, right? And Facebook is popular in Africa and more than other platforms because it's the and not just because of the access, but also the ease of communicating with your family. And WhatsApp
Mhm.
also is like the platform to communicate beyond phones,
Yeah.
for those reasons, because of those eases of access. So I think there's always, like you said, that tension between when it comes to the issue of monetization and approaches. So, but lastly, what advice would you give women in Africa who want to break barriers by venturing into machine learning and AI, but may not know where to begin? And I'm going to raise my hand and say I am one of those people who are like really, really enthusiastically trying to
Yeah.
learn everything I can about AI. And it's like sometimes you just think, where am I starting from?
Where do you start? Yeah. I think my advice is the same advice I mentioned a little while ago, but it's you need to read and you need to try to do. And
Mm,
okay, I think read, write, and do. That's my advice. So the first one you might say, okay, that's tricky because there's so much content on AI. Where would I even start? But there's a lot of good people, like good organizations that are doing a lot of significant work. So I would definitely say read as much as you can and form your own opinions on what you think it is. Like, don't fall into the hole of thinking about the risks or the biases or the harms of AI or that it's bad or whatever. I think it's very interesting. So currently, I in the game development space right now in 2025, among game developers, there's a lot of pushback against the use of AI in making video games, which is very interesting because this sector feels that AI is going to take their jobs, and AI is going to take the is many, 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 many jobs, and it's sort of a time to see, okay, but what are the new types of jobs that may be created, and it's a very tricky time in human development because a lot of people are going to suffer from the lack of jobs because every day when I see what AI is capable of doing and like how much advanced it gets every day, it is scary, but it's also fascinating. So I think it's very important for people to form their own opinions one way or the other. And then I think it's very important for people to write. I think that writing is such a good way to share your thinking and to make connections, to make networks, to give different perspectives to this whole debate. And I'm really encouraging young people, don't use AI to write articles you put on the internet. It's so much nicer to hear your voice. And I think a lot of us use AI. I use AI every day. I use it for writing, for game dev, for whatever. I do my art. I do rely, on AI for like poses and things like that. I use it in so many different ways. But I think what I never want to do is to lose my voice in AI because it's so easy to see. I can look at any paragraph and I can tell you that AI wrote that. And if I look at that and I see someone's writing as AI, I immediately don't want to read it because why? Why would I do that? So it's really important, I think, for people to maintain their voice. So read, form your opinion, maintain your voice, and as much as you can, try to build some stuff. There's so many tools now. AI has made it so easy to make things. It would be really nice to see people across Africa build things that are useful. As we talked before, it doesn't always have to make money. Sometimes the joy of life is providing something good to the world. So as much as possible, look at tutorials and try to make something that can be useful to someone because I think that will open so many doors for you.
absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me, Neema. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
So I loved how Neema spoke about turning online safety into a story about data colonialism as a lived reality, and about resisting the pressures to build for scale when what we really need is to build for justice. She made it clear that feminist leadership in tech isn't just about representation, it's about radically rethinking how systems are designed, who they serve, and who they silence. So thank you for listening to her Media Diary. If you found today's conversation inspiring, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with somebody who needs to hear it. If you'd like to join me on an episode of the podcast, send me an email at gmc@africanwomeninmedia.com and visit our website, hermediadiary.com, to listen to all the other episodes of this podcast. Subscribe and follow Her Media Diary on your favorite podcasting platforms, and stay tuned on our partner radio stations from across Africa. And don't forget, join the conversation using the hashtag Her Media Diary. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and keep amplifying the stories that matter.